Okay, so we're going to be resealing one of these Crosman Challenger air rifles. The first step is to remove the action screw. After that screw is removed, you can remove the stock from the action. This particular action still has air inside of it, so we're going to have to degas it. We can see that it has air. Pull it back. Verify that it's unloaded. Close the chamber, fire. Still has air. So use our degassing tool, plug it into the rear, the power adjustment nub. Make sure our hammer is down. When the degassing tool can no longer be screwed in with your fingers, use a tool, plug it into the back, and slowly turn. What this is doing is pushing the hammer forward so that it's hitting the poppet valve and the air is being expelled from the end of the barrel. If we look at the air gauge indicates that the rifle is degassed. Now we can unscrew the degassing tool. Verify by pulling the hammer back. So the action is degassed. Next, we can remove our air gauge. Okay, so using our adjustable wrench, we can go around the flats of the gauge and very carefully, without cracking the glass, unscrew it. The gauge is removed. We can see the threads. Your next step can be to remove the trigger. This is a 3/32 wrench. Trigger guard comes off. The rear screw can be taken off with either a square drive or a flathead screwdriver. You're going to want to hold with your thumb the rear of the power adjuster screw, as this is under spring tension. Trigger. Again, holding with your thumb. Remove the screw on the top of the aluminum receiver. Slowly relieve pressure with your thumb. Hammer adjuster, or the spring tensioning knob will come off. There are two sides to this knob, one with a hole on the top and one without. The side with the hole on the top always goes towards the top of the action. Take out our spring. Pull our charging handle back. Helps if you do this sideways. This will pull out our hammer and our linking pin between the hammer and the charging handle. This does come off. The side with the shoulder will fit into the top of the hammer like this. Then we can remove the rest of our charging handle. See how it works. If you pull it back and you can see the holes, then you could remove the centerpiece and service the bearings. When you push it forward, this locks the centerpiece into place and it cannot fall out. Next, we're going to be removing the screw that holds the aluminum receiver to the air cylinder. This is again done with a 3/32 Allen wrench. Next, tip the action backwards, and we can take out our transfer bar. If we look at this, there's two threaded holes. The hole that is on this side, the same side as the spring, this goes towards the muzzle and is used to secure our receiver. The screw on the bottom that is closer to the trigger is used to secure our trigger like that. Remove your plastic cap. Next, we could remove our muzzle and the two barrel bands. This is done with a 5/64 Allen wrench. Be careful not to lose the set screws. The barrel band in the front will only have one set screw on the bottom of it. The barrel band that's closest to the receiver will have two set screws, one on top and one on the bottom. Now the receiver and the air cylinder can be separated. If we look at the receiver, we can see the transfer port. The side with the small opening plugs in to the receiver. And basically what this does is it allows you to transfer air between your air cylinder and your chamber. We can see the hole that goes into the bottom of the barrel through the receiver. Now we could pull the barrel from the aluminum receiver, although unless you're using a rod to clean it, this isn't necessary. I use a bore snake. Okay, so now we're going to be servicing the air cylinder. I guess this is the part that most people have the hardest time with. If we look at the top of our air cylinder, we can see the small rubber gasket. This is used to create a seal between the bottom of our transfer port and the aluminum receiver. We're going to be replacing this since this one is smashed. So using some sort of pick, we can remove it. You see it's a square gasket. Next, we can remove the three Phillips head screws on the sides of the air cylinder. Okay, this screw was really stuck, so what I did was to put the cylinder in a vise using a set of soft jaws to give myself more leverage, and I was able to break the bond between the screw and the threads. Usually they aren't this hard to remove. Next, we're going to remove the fill valve from the air cylinder. To do this, I'm going to be using a 9/16 wrench. Now that we've removed our fill valve, we can remove the rest of the parts that are inside the air cylinder. Typically, it will not be so hard to remove this piece. This air cylinder has been painted, so I think that a little bit of paint had formed a bond between the shoulder of the fill valve and the top of the threads. The tool that we are going to use to remove the internal components of our air cylinder is a wooden dowel with a hole drilled on the top of it. It's very important that it has a hole drilled on the top of it. So basically what we're going to do is from the trigger end of the air cylinder, or the side that has this cutout on it, we're going to insert our dowel until we feel the poppet valve fit into the hole that we drilled in the end of our dowel. Now we can use our port filler if we want to save the O-rings to fill the pressure gauge port as we push our components out. So right now you can see I pushed it right up to the end. And if we just now all of the components on the inside of our cylinder have been pushed out. These are the parts that go on the inside of the cylinder. This is our pressure gauge holder. So it sits right here like this. This is our poppet valve. So we can see there are 3 threaded holes on the sides of it. This is where the Phillips head screws attach. And then there is a through hole at the 12 o'clock position that allows our air to enter from the front, hit the poppet. When the hammer goes forward, it pushes our transfer bar. That pushes the poppet in, and it opens up just enough to allow a small puff of air to go around the outer diameter of the poppet and up through the 12 o'clock hole. And from there, that air goes into our transfer hole and then into the chamber. And that's how we can fire a pellet through our barrel. So for this rifle, I'm just going to be replacing all of these components. We have a brand new poppet and a brand new fill valve. This is a Gen 2 or 3 fill valve. The way we can tell is that it is a lot shorter than our original, and it uses a different O-ring to seal it to the air cylinder. Between the new generation fill valve and the gauge port holder that's been in all generations of this rifle, they all use the same O-ring. The older generation fill valves will use 2 thinner O-rings. The O-rings that are on our poppet valve have remained the same for all generations. They are the thinner O-rings. the same ones that are found on the Generation 1 fill valves. So our first step to reassembling the rifle is to clean the inside of the air cylinder. To do this, all I'm going to do is use a little bit of denatured alcohol and a rag, and I'm going to push this through the bore. Pushing from the muzzle end towards the trigger end. You see that it's cleaning out all the debris that was on the inside of this tube. And I'm gonna do this 2 to 3 times to make sure that everything is indeed been cleaned out of the tube. Once we verify that the inside of the tube is clean, we can begin reassembly. So our first step will be to use our new poppet valve. We want to be sure that the 2 halves of this assembly are tight, so twist it. This connection is not loose. And we want to have it so that the top, the 12 o'clock through hole matches the hole for the transfer port at the 12 o'clock position on our air cylinder. We can tell that it is the 12 o'clock position by the cutout on the rear of the cylinder. I'm putting a little bit of super lube on the O-rings. This will just help it slide in a little bit easier.
On our gauge port holder, we're going to want to clean out the female threads and replace the 2 O-rings.
We want to make sure that the channel for the O-rings is cleared of any debris to get the best seal between the O-ring and the inner walls of our air cylinder. Again, we're going to want to put the gauge holder in so that this hole is oriented with the hole on the side of our air tube that allows us to put our gauge in. Now, this can be a tight fit. Now, once we have these 2 components in, we're going to push them so that all of their connections correspond to the holes on our cylinder. When these come from the factories, there's a burr on the inside of this hole. You can use a deburring whip to deburr this hole prior to installing these 2 components. And then I recommend using an air compressor or some sort of tool to clean out any chips that may come off if you do deburr it. Now, in order to avoid tearing the O-rings, I'm going to use this Discovery gauge port filler. Cover the hole. And slowly push these components into place. Now the components are in their correct position, although their holes are not oriented the correct way. So we can use a pick to reorient them. Okay, so now the components are in their correct position. If we look at the 12 o'clock position, we can see the through hole for the poppet valve. If we look at our gauge port holder, we can see the internal threads. Now we can reinstall our 3 Phillips head screws that hold the poppet assembly in place. And when you do this, you don't have to make them super tight. I'd say you make them about hand tight, or maybe 20 inch-pounds at max. On this particular rifle, I'm going to be putting in a new pressure gauge. So this already has the Teflon tape wrapped around its outside threads. If you were going to try to salvage your old pressure gauge, you would need to rewrap this with Teflon tape. That would be about 2.5 to 3 full wraps around the threads. So when you're installing this gauge, you can pretty much just use your hands to tighten it. Although if you see that there's a large amount of exposed threads, you can use your wrench to slowly tighten it down. When you're doing this, you need to be very careful that you do not deform the outer edges of the gauge. There isn't really any timing involved with installing this gauge. The markings on the inside can be either at 12 or 6 o'clock. It doesn't matter. Although I guess it's preferable if the readout was at the 12 o'clock position. Now that our gauge is reinstalled, this is close enough to being at 12. But now that this is installed, we can go ahead and put on our fill port. Really, all we have to do is make this hand tight. The pressure of the fully pressurized cylinder will create the seal. Now we can put a little bit of air inside of this and do a water test. Okay, so now that our air cylinder is resealed, we're gonna test to see if there's any leaks. The way that we're gonna do this is by dunking our air cylinder in a bucket of water. So leave it in there for a couple seconds. If we do not see any bubbles leaving any of the openings in a constant stream, that means that our system is sealed. So this side looks like it's okay. We're going to turn it around, dunk our fill valve into it. Turn it. And there does not appear to be any bubbles leaking out of our cylinder. So this cylinder appears to be fully resealed and ready to be reassembled. So in order to blow all the water off, we're going to use our air gun. Be sure to get on the inside of the cylinder. Okay, so now that we've confirmed that there's no leaks coming from our air cylinder, we can begin reassembly. Something that I'm going to do before we put the entire action back together is to clean out the barrel. I like to use a bore snake to do this. I think this one's made by Patch Worms. So on this charging handle, the lockup still feels pretty tight, so we're not going to change the O-ring on it. We do need another gasket seal. You could put a dab of silicone oil on the square gasket, although personally I don't. Now we're going to reinstall our transfer bar. Again, there are 2 threaded holes on this. The forwardmost hole goes towards the muzzle end of the action. We want to very carefully realign this transfer port with the square gasket. This will give us the best air seal. Something that you can do is to loosen these two set screws to take the load off of the barrel. You can see there's no gap between the lower radius of our aluminum receiver and the 12 o'clock position of our air cylinder. If we look at our barrel, it's almost parallel to our air cylinder, but not quite. So what we're gonna do is to tighten the set screws until we see that our barrel and air cylinder are parallel. So about there. If we tap the top of our barrel, you see that there's still enough rigidity for it to float, but it's not at an angle. It's not pointed up, it's not pointed down, it's parallel. That's the key. Now we can reinstall our barrel bands. So using the barrel band that has the set screw at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, this will be installed first. If we look at the top of our barrel and bottom of our air cylinder, we can see the dimple marks that our set screws made. So we just have to move it down till it lines up with that. And try not to drop the set screws. It's very small. And just go until these are 2-finger tight. With this top set screw, we can use this to adjust how our barrel floats. So we only want to tighten it until we feel it contact the top of the barrel. You do not want to tighten it down all the way. Now we can adjust these set screws until we see that our barrel is floating in this front barrel band. So if we look, you can see that our barrel is indeed floated all the way around this front barrel band. Now we can reinstall our muzzle. And we want to be sure that the radius on the bottom of our muzzle is running true with the top of our air cylinder. Another test will be for us to look directly down the top dovetails to make sure that they are parallel with one another. In this case, they are. Put our end cap back on. We can go ahead and reinstall our charging handle. Now you really don't need any sort of lubricant on this charging handle. If anything, a light film of dry lube will be good. Let it dry. Insert it halfway into our receiver. Take our hammer with a pin installed. Pull the charging bundle back until we see the groove and line up the groove in the charging handle. We can tell that it is installed correctly by pushing the hammer in with our finger and watching the charging handle move forward. If we pull the charging handle back, it should also pull the hammer back. We need to make sure that the internal post for the charging handle is aligned with or the through hole on the post is aligned with the hole on the top of our aluminum receiver. Next, we can take our spring, drop it into the hammer, take our power adjuster, put this on the back with the side with two holes facing up. Use our screw. You want to slightly tighten this power adjuster. Don't torque it down. This trigger is adjusted well. Give me a slight turn. Reinstall our trigger. Now the key to doing this is not torquing down everything super tight until all the screws are installed. Now that all the screws are installed, torque everything down. And test, make sure. There's still good lockup. Charging handle moves freely. Our trigger works. There's no air leaking out the sides of our action or through our chamber. Safety works. And now we can go ahead and drop this back into our stock. To reinstall the action, simply line it up with your stock. Use your action screw and tighten it. And your rifle is now complete. Okay, so we're going to be talking about how to service the T-handle or charging handle. The T-handle has several parts. At the end you have the bolt probe O-ring. This is used to create a seal between your probe and your chamber breech. When the O-ring is inside, this creates the air seal. The T-handle has two moving parts. So you have this rod and the handle itself. When it is in this position, when you cannot see the through holes, it is locked. When you pull it back, it is unlocked. Once again, locked, unlocked. There is a center, there's a center rod that retains two ball bearings. This is what allows the T-handle to lock and unlock. So we're going to start by unlocking the T-handle. Next, we're going to use some sort of pin or a pick or something to push this center rod out. I like to do this with these holes pointed up as it allows me to retain the ball bearings. Use a rag to clean your center rod. Next, we're going to shake out the ball bearings. So flip it over, give it a few taps. And right now we've shaken out both of our ball bearings. Next, you're going to want to hold your rod and push the T-handle in this direction. We do not want to pull it off in this direction, as it will destroy the O-ring. T-handle's off. You can see the O-ring. We can take that off if we need to change it, or just to clean this groove. Wipe it down with your rag. Wipe down the inner diameter of the T-handle. There are two detents on the roof of the T-handle, and we want to make sure that those detents aren't getting oblonged and that there's no burrs. This one looks good. We can also clean our ball bearings. To begin reassembling this, we want to slip the O-ring back over the end of our probe. And we see that there are two sides to this probe. So this side has these two similar through holes. This side has one through hole and an oblonged hole. The side with the oblonged hole sits at the 12 o'clock position. It points towards the roof of the T-handle. And to do this, we want to flip everything upside down. So make sure that the two similar holes are pointed up. Make sure that the bottom of the T-handle is pointed up. We can apply a little bit of lubricant to the O-ring. And slide it in the back of the T-handle. And there's a slight bevel to the T-handle to assist you in installing the probe. Now we want to be very careful not to pull this all the way through or else we'll destroy our O-ring. You can see the holes are lined up. We'll take our ball bearings, drop them through the holes, and we want to push them through all the way until they are sitting in their detents. This can take a couple of tries. Next, we're going to take our center rod with the through hole pointed this way. Insert it into the back of the assembly. And when we see the top with the through hole emerge on this side and no ball bearings fall out, that tells us that our assembly is complete. So we can lock and unlock it with 2 fingers. When it is locked, we can tell that it is assembled correctly because if we push our rod, it won't fall out the back. If we twist it, the ball bearings will prevent us from being able to twist the T-handle all the way. So this is a correctly assembled T-handle. Okay, so we're going to be talking about how to adjust the velocity on these Crosmans. So the first thing we need to understand is how our firing mechanism works. So we have the poppet valve, the silver piece, with the spring-loaded poppet inside of it. This is what the poppet looks like on the inside. we have our transfer bar, or this has our this free floating pin and a spring. We have our hammer, our spring, and our spring tension adjuster with a knurled knob on the back of it. When they are inside of the gun, they're oriented like this. Now, when we're talking about adjusting the velocity, these two pieces cannot be adjusted, so we're going to take them away. The remaining pieces are what can be adjusted. This is our hammer. So when we talk about adjusting the course velocity, we're going to do that with the hammer. What I mean by course velocity is that this will get us in the ballpark of where we want our gun to be. So let's say we want it to be in the 550 range. By adjusting the length of the hammer, we adjust how much travel it is. So the more travel it has, the harder it's going to hit the transfer bar, the harder the valve will be open. In its shortest position, we get the most velocity. As we make the hammer longer, we get less velocity. It is possible to adjust this when the gun is assembled. When everything is lined up like this, there's a hole in the back of our knurled knob. So you put the, I believe this is a 1/8. Yeah. So we put the back of our 1/8 wrench through this hole, and when we turn it, we can adjust the length of the hammer. Typically, this is about how long I leave my hammers. This knurled knob is used to adjust our spring tension, so we can adjust it in for maximum spring tension, or we can adjust it out for minimum spring tension. To get a baseline, I'll usually start with it with about this much space. This can help us fine-tune our velocity. So if we need the gun to go up or down, say plus or minus 5 FPS, we can do it with this tensioning knob. If we need the gun to go up or down, say 10 or more FPS, we're going to do that by adjusting the hammer. Okay, so now we're going to use a chronograph to adjust the velocity. So always use the pellets that you're going to use during the match. In this case, we're using these 8.2 grain RWS bellow pellets. And whenever we're adjusting the velocity, we want to have our rifles filled up as much as they can. So the first shot was at 584. That's a little high. .589. .588. So right now the velocity is a little high, so I'm going to adjust it down. Using my 1/8 inch wrench, I'm going to insert it into the back of the knurled knob till I feel it engage the hammer. I can twist it clockwise, so give me a longer hammer. You can test it again. .574. .568. Still a little high. Could go another full turn. .558. .561. .559. We're almost there, so I'm gonna go like a half turn. .551. .553. .548. So that's around where I want it to be. If I wanted to adjust it slightly higher, I can use the knurled knob. Screw this in. That'll give me more spring tension. .564. A little too much. .558. .556. .551. So that's how you adjust the velocity.